Okay, so hello everybody, welcome back to Pocket Perspectives. So my name is Jack, and as always, we've got T with us.
Hi.
Hello. So season one went really well. It was something that we've both never done before, and I think we got a lot of support, and we both really enjoyed it. So we thought we'd come back bigger and better than ever with a season two, and we're going to have lots of exciting guests. It's going to be a really good season, isn't it, T?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm personally excited for this episode because we've got a very special guest with us today. So I've personally watched this guest for quite a while now, so I'm a little bit fangirling over here. But I think it'll be a really good episode. So yeah, our guest today is Laura Moore. She is a money and mindset coach and personal finance educator. And she creates a lot of content. So I follow you on TikTok and Instagram. And I love how she talks about money in a fun and kind of relatable and judgment-free way, which is exactly what we want to do on this podcast. So I just thought it'd be a fitting guest for start season two. So yeah, welcome Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me. I love that you're fangirling. I'm like this. Stop.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of your social media content as well, but for the people that maybe are listening that haven't seen any of your content or heard any of it, we'd love for you to sort of just share a little bit about how you got to where you are now and what inspired you to take that sort of career path.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, for anybody that doesn't know me, I've had quite a interesting path into doing what I do, because it's that classic thing of like I fell into it, which I think when you're in a certain industry, it's like, how did you just fall into that? So to give a bit of background, when I was like 10, I was like, I want to be an actress, and I spent most of my young and teenage and early adult life wanting to go into the acting world. So when I left school at 18, I chose not to go to university. I wanted to go to drama school. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, drama school is like £15,000 per year. Plus, you usually live in London. And when I did it, wanted to do it way back like 12 years ago, you couldn't get student finance like you can now. So now they're attached to unis and people can get, it's so much more accessible. But at the time, I was like, right, well, I need to find this money. And I knew that my parents couldn't give it to me. I knew that there was no wiggle room there. So delusionally maybe and naively, I went on this journey to save that money. So at 19, I got my first ever like full-time job. I was working for a marketing agency, and by the age of 22 I'd saved the 15 grand, and I was like buzzing, ready to go to drama school, like all these plans in place. And then very last minute, literally about 2 weeks before I was due to start, my best friends asked if I wanted to go traveling with them. So I deferred my place. I went traveling. I went to Australia, Bali, Cambodia, Thailand. I went to New Zealand. It was amazing. Spent every penny. No regrets either. Like, best decision I could have made. But when I came home, I guess I reflected on it, and what I realized, and my light bulb moment was, in that moment, I didn't have to choose between which one I could afford. It was which one did I want to do. And that's the first time I guess I've had a really positive experience with money and with what having money can do for you and the power of that. And that is what sort of pushed me down the line of opening up, talking about money online. I just sort of noticed, everyone was like, how on earth did you do that? And it sort of came out really slowly, and I was like, sharing tips with friends. And I was like, I think I need to share this with the people of the world. So I started creating content online, and now this is my full-time job. So yeah, now I've got a podcast. I do well-being talks, I host events, I have a podcast, I do one-to-ones. There's so many things that I do, but it's all centered around helping people to feel good about money, get financially confident, and build wealth. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. I love that. And I think the reason why we started this podcast as well is because I think money in general can be quite taboo, and I think especially British culture, we just kind of want to shy away and just get on with things and not really talk about it. So we definitely relate to that. So did you ever find it that like people were saying like, oh, you shouldn't be talking about this, or do you ever feel any personal like taboo about talking about it?
Yeah, so when I actually saved that £15,000, I didn't tell anybody. It was actually all a secret. So my friends knew that I was working to fund drama school. They knew that was kind of going on. I guess they didn't really ask specifics. I just cracked on and did my thing. When it got to the point of us going to Australia, they didn't know how much I had. They just knew that when we got to Sydney, two of them went off and I had to get, like, one worked as a waitress, one worked in HR, and I was just like by the pool, like, hee, living my best life. And it wasn't until we got home that maybe even 6 months later, one of my friends was like, how much did you actually have? And I was like, £15,000. And they were like, what? So I felt, I guess, this shame around the fact that I was doing it, and it kept me quiet. And I've reflected on it over the years, and I think it kind of just comes down to that, like the small town mentality of, like, getting stuck in your, like, circles of who you live with, where you're raised, the societal narratives, all of that stuff that and funnily enough, I have really supportive friends, and they wouldn't have judged me. They would have been like, you go, girl. But it was the stories I was telling myself about that. And then when I started talking about it online, it was, I started doing it maybe like 3-4 years ago, kind of before a lot of people were doing it. Like, I was kind of one of the first influencers talking about it. And to be fair, I was only met with so much support and interest, and it was, I've had a good experience in that respect. And I think that a lot of the people that you end up connecting with in your community are that, they say you find your tribe, but I think there are so many people that want to talk about it but haven't known how, haven't known who to turn to, haven't felt like there's a community that they fitted in. So I think that, one of the things that I did is create that space for the people that do follow me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's very interesting that you talk about the shame and just kind of, I think emotions in general are just so important to talk about. And I think it's a big topic that we're going to talk about today. So I mention it every episode, but I did psychology at uni. So I absolutely love kind of understanding human behavior and what influences to do certain things. So I did a bit of consumer psychology, and I think that's what's helped me go into, like, marketing and things like that. But what emotions would you say, other than, like, kind of the shame, do you think has influenced, like, money management? I think there's so many, but is there any of, like, your favorite to talk about?
I guess the thing that I find really interesting is just in general how your emotions have an impact, like, but I guess some of the biggest ones are, yes, shame. In the instance, I think shame can come in a lot when you're talking about debts, because it's this idea of, like, why don't you know how to manage your money? That's embarrassing. Because I would say, why do we as humans have good information but we don't make good decisions? So why is it that we know that we need to spend less than we earn, but we find it really hard to do? And it's because it's about so much more than just information. We can know something logically, but on an emotional level, not know how to react or handle that. And that plays out with money, very specifically, because in society, especially in the UK, it's such a taboo topic. Like, you're not allowed to talk about your salary with your, your colleagues. If you ever ask somebody how much the house was, probably got a parent or a grandparent, like, can't say that, that's really rude. So all these things, like, and especially when it then comes to debt, because it's like, really, to have good information and then make a good decision, you need to have a good relationship with yourself, you need to have a good relationship with money, and you need to have a good decision making process. So there's kind of three things that have an impact. So I think the shame and the debt one is a big one. Another one that I see is around, like, guilt, like the guilt of spending, the guilt of not saving, the guilt of whatever that looks like. It shows up in so many different ways for people. And I think that that's a really important one to acknowledge as well, because it keeps people, like, stuck, keeps people quite stagnant. And I'm a big believer that you can't shame or guilt yourself into better behavior. Like, that's never going to be a sustainable energy source for good habits. It has to come from a place of self-love and self-kindness and self-respect. And I think that there's a big disconnect between that. I think it's really
I think a big one as well is, like, the fear. Like, for me personally, like, when I first got a credit card, I was too scared to use it because I thought, I'm going to end up having this credit card debt that I've got to pay off. Whereas it can actually be quite a useful tool to have, can't it? To, like, build your credit score up and all sorts of different things. But I was just too scared.
And it's funny you say that. Fear is definitely probably up there with one of the biggest ones that I have when I speak to people in my community. Fear shows up in so many different ways as well. So, like, in that instance, the fear of having a credit card, it's like, okay, is it that I don't trust myself? Is it that I'm scared that I'm going to get into debt? Is it that, what is it, the fear of, X, Y, and Z? And a lot of people, when I speak to people about money, one of their biggest fears is not having enough. And yet a lot of the time people don't know what enough looks like. So you have a fear of something that you don't even have a solution to.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's irrational, it's that you can quieten those fears or transmute those fears into another feeling by some really small, simple steps, mindset and practically. But fear underpins so many so many behaviors when it comes to money, and whether it's the fear of spending or the fear of saving, which I think when you talk about like the fear of saving sounds so counterintuitive, because logically we know having savings is a good thing. But if your belief system tells you that having money is bad, maybe you had an uncle who was an absolute no, and he had loads of money, and you've built up a picture having money makes you greedy, makes you selfish, makes you not a very nice person. Or you heard your parents say things like, oh, these rich like downplaying wealth. Naturally you build up a belief system that having money is not safe. So even though saving feels like a good thing, your behavior from fear is then like, spend everything as soon as I get it. And it's all happening subconsciously, but fear underpins a lot, definitely.
Yeah, I think for me, on like a personal level, I think I've got a fear. Like, I live with my partner and we're both really decent wage. We went to uni and did the whole thing, and I think we're both very comfortable now. But I have a fear of like losing it, and like I have a fear of like kind of getting there. And we don't have kids, but sometime soon we hope to. And I think when I have kids, will I like still have this fear of kind of like losing it all, and will I like, how will that affect my money? Because right now it's just me, him, and the dogs, and it's like that's not going to affect too many people. But when I have kids, it terrifies me, because I'm like, will this stay with me forever?
Yeah, and I guess like in that instance, like the thing that I always talk about is challenging your brain and giving it evidence of the other side of it. And the question in that instance is like, if you're scared of losing it all, what is the real fear? Is it what it looks like to have no money, and that is your fear? Or is it coming from a place of you don't trust your own ability to manage your own money? Because in what scenario would you just suddenly lose it all? In what scenario, like, it's so not far-fetched, like you still have to be responsible and put precautions in place, but like it's a bit like the fear, and I know a lot of people have this, I actually don't, but like the fear that your loved ones are going to randomly die. Me and my friend had a conversation, me and my housemate, and she was like, like, I just get scared you and my other housemate are just going to die. And I'm like, I have never had that thought in my life. That's so interesting that consumes you. But in this instance, one of her parents died when she was really young. So you can see that direct like correlation. So it's asking yourself the fear of losing it. Like, if you did lose it all, well, you'd still be okay. You just build it back up again because you've done it once. You can do it again. Is it the fear of like, how I manage my money? Okay, what can I put in place? So sometimes there's really practical solutions to showing your brain other ways to thinking about money when it comes to your fears.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other side of it as well as happiness. So I think I watched Stephen Bartlett's podcast, The Diary of a CEO, recently, and there was an episode about like money, and whatever guest he had on was saying that there's like, when with like wealth and income, it goes like your happiness like tends to go up, like studies have shown, and then you get to a certain point, I can't remember what number it was, maybe about 80,000, and then it kind of plateaus. And it's like, people often think that with money comes happiness, and then it's not always true, like it plateaus out, and people don't realize that.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot when I do financial well-being workshops, because I say what happens a lot is people say to me, I'll be in a better position or I'll be happier when I have more money. And the couple of things that I say to that is, how you manage £10 is how you manage £10,000. So if you have an issue with money management right now, yes, sometimes we have to take into account privileges and that some people really do just not have enough income and expenses are high. Taking out that portion of people, sometimes it's about your financial habits. If you get those in place first, when you then make more money, you can actually get more joy from it because you're able to save more. You're able to really understand, intentionally spend and save your money. So that's one thing. But what we do know is people that haven't got those habits in place and have got more money, they just have higher bills. So they have the same level of stress. And like during COVID, they did this, it was an article, I can't remember what newspaper it or like where it was from, but it was an article where they spoke to different people with different salaries during COVID. And there was one family, I don't know why I remember this so much, but it just really sticks out. And they, between their household, they were on a salary of about, they had an household income of about £300,000. And, you know, that's a large sum of money. But they had 3 kids. They sent all of them to private school. They had a chauffeur. Everything was like concierged. It was convenience. It was a luxury, which is lovely. But what they hadn't done is create a financial buffer. So when COVID hit and their income was at a potential, it was in jeopardy, they were suddenly like, we've got all of these financial commitments and it only works when the income remains the same. So there was no safety blanket. And actually we can create a sense of safety through having an emergency fund, saving, getting good habits. And it just proves it's not about how much you have. And in addition to that, if we think about lottery winners as well, how many lottery winners, the stats are crazy for the amount of lottery winners that win the jackpot, millions. And then within the space of like 5 years, they're either bankrupt or really unwell or something has happened, you know, and it just proves that financial literacy and financial confidence have to come first before the actual money itself.
And I feel like obviously a lot of people say that they're more happy the more money they've got and the more money they can spend, but I feel like there's a level to it as well where so it's called, like we've seen, it's value-based spending, where some things that you don't necessarily want to buy, you don't feel that happiness, so you put more value in certain things that you want. So for me, I don't want to be spending my money on car insurance and fixing an oil leak in my car. So like that's really boring to me, but to someone else they might quite enjoy doing something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I also always talk about, whenever people say to me about like their bills, I say it's a reframe. Like, to be able to spend money on a bill, on rent, on whatever that is, you find boring, but how amazing that you have the ability to spend money on that and you get something off the back of it. In this instance, you get to drive your car around, you get to go from A to B without needing to get public transport. Or if you spend money on rent, how amazing that you get to pay for your own roof over your head. Like, obviously there's, you know, it's such a nuanced argument because we could talk about the housing crisis and how expensive things are, and we don't want to put everything just like, let's just brush it under as gratitude and toxic positivity, which we don't want to do. But there is a level of reframe about the way that you spend. But I'm a big believer in like value-based spending and really and intentional spending. Like, I looked over my spending. I did like an annual review one year, and I was spending like £1,500 a year on coffee. And I looked at that and I was like, okay, this is back when I had a salary job and I was like working in, you know, I was actually working from home like before COVID even happened. I was like, I made it trendy. But no one else was doing it. I had no work from home friends and I was really lonely. But I had this moment where I was like, genuinely, coffee really brings me joy. That first sip in the morning, the whole experience, the going to the coffee shop, that brings me joy. I would rather cut back on the £1,500 that I've spent on Ubers and just spend longer and get the train, and so I can continue to feed my coffee habit. But the difference with the energy is it then becomes intentional. You're getting to decide, yes, I spend my money on that. And I think the hard thing with that, especially in our generation, is this kind of idea around like social media, instant versus delayed gratification, and just thinking that we deserve to have everything all at once because we work. And actually we have to build up to things, and that's why clearing debt can be so painful, right? Because you've had all the enjoyment already of whatever it is that you spent your money on. Especially if, you know, it's lifestyle purchases and not you've got into debt because there's been a crisis and it's been an emergency. But, you know, in the instance for people that have just general consumer debt, we've already had the fun, we've been on the holidays, we've worn the clothes, we've done the things, and now we're having to suffer the consequences. And that's hard because it's so unmotivating. You're not, you know, you don't look at your money and go, yay, this gets to go here. It's like, oh man, I've already enjoyed this thing and that's got to go off. So the motivation for that has to come from like self-care and knowing that you deserve the stress-free life of not having debt. That's where that motivation has to come from.
I like think as well about like upbringing and like trauma, and like I think that depending on your situation, obviously what you value is different. So people who have maybe lived in like really low income families and even poverty can either grow up and they, you know, maybe get their own money and they start living comfortably. What they value is probably different to someone who potentially had a better upbringing and had more money at a young age. So I just think that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to take like what your version of like financial security looks like, because one person's version of that is so different to someone else's. And I think taking all of that into account, like as an individual, the best thing you can do is like really get to know yourself and understand what your money mindset is and what impact your childhood has had on your beliefs and your ideas around money. And you like take not necessarily accountability, but I guess ownership of that, and be like, I didn't get to say what happened to me as a child. Yes, it's probably had this and this impact, but let's use it as fuel to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So I think it can be really empowering to like own it and go, yeah, like I'm going to make this work for me, and that's going to get me to X, Y, and Z.
A lot of people come to IE Hub who are, you know, obviously in debt and they struggle with budgeting. So like that's literally what we do, is we provide a form for them to budget effectively. But we also suggest like put some money aside to do what you love, and even if that's saving and building that up to, you know, go and treat yourself on a weekend and have a shop. Like obviously it's so important to pay off your debts and do what you can to be like a bit more financially stable, but like taking away all joy and happiness is just gonna put you in a rut, and it's just gonna make you sad. You're just not gonna want to have any motivation to do anything, you know.
This is something I feel very strongly about. I talk about the same online with my friends, with my community, and I always say, regardless of why you've got in debt, regardless of whether it was your own recklessness or whether it was something that happened, like draw a line in the sand, acknowledge, take it all in, forgive yourself, like do that work. And as you go on the journey of clearing debt, some people in some instances do like to go, I'm going to go completely frugal, I'm going to spend nothing, and I just want to get it done. And that's okay, but that's not the only way. It's okay to take a little bit longer, and you still to be able to have some enjoyment out of your life over the course of that year, 2, 3 years, however long it takes. Because if you know what you're working towards, and you can say, I know that I'm clearing my debt, I'm doing these things, okay, maybe it's going to take me 5 years or 7 years, but at least during that journey, I've also got some really good memories and really good experiences, and I've had joy. And I always talk about having a fun fund. So if you struggle with overspending or like money management, have a little pot of money that you're like, this money, whether it's a tenner, whether it's £100, this money can go on whatever I want it, and I'm going to get full enjoyment out of that. And it helps you connect with your money in a way where you view it as a tool, not just as this thing where it's just all clearing off debt.
Yeah, I think on that as well, there's different sort of mindsets that people have based on the challenges that they're facing. So there's the scarcity. I don't know how you pronounce that word, but that
I
mindset.
Scarcity, I think.
when you say it, it sounds weird, doesn't it? But when you read it, it makes sense. But so some people will worry that there's never enough money, sort of thing. So they might sort of be reluctant to spend on important things. Then they get a bit more anxiety and a bit more stress. Whereas on the other hand, there's the abundance mindset. So they're people that believe that there are so many opportunities to earn and to manage their money effectively. So they've got a lot more confidence. But obviously it is a bit of a scale, because if you're too confident, that's not necessarily a good thing. So we just sort of thought it would be interesting to get your take on ways to sort of move between those two mindsets.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the initial thing that I would say, like just to give an overview for anyone who's listening to this and maybe hasn't learned about it before or doesn't know much about it, your money mindset is just essentially a set of unique beliefs and attitudes towards money that impact how you save, spend, and manage it. Now, we make all of our decisions from a place of emotion, not logic. And that's because when we have a thought or we hear a certain word, it creates an emotion. That emotion drives our behavior. And then obviously if you're doing that bit of behavior over and over and it becomes a habit, that essentially becomes your life. Now, your money mindset is kind of made up from a couple of things. One being like your money story. So what happened to you as you were a child, like that made you, what's your view of the world? And the reason why that's so, so important, I'm very passionate about talking about it, is because when you're younger, your brain waves are at a different state. So you don't have an analytical mind, and you're not questioning everything that comes in. You're not going, you know, at the age of 5, like, excuse me, mum or dad, like, can I just question that? Like, you just take it all on to be true. So by the time you become, you know, a teenager, you have built up this view of how money works in the world that's been impacted on, you know, the people around you, because we absorb the messages from the people closest to us. So you've kind of got like what you were brought up in. You also then have societal beliefs and narratives, like I said, like the difference between the UK versus the US. They view money very differently. Then like religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, generational beliefs. So all of these things build up this picture, and you yourself will have your own view of money in the world. Now, when it comes to scarcity versus abundance, a lot of that scarcity just kind of leans into like fear. And so if we give my example, my dad was always out working. We as a family never seemed to have any money. And I built up the view, the belief that money is hard to make and keep. That was one of my biggest blocks. So when I turned 16, I went the other way and became a total hoarder. And I was like, if I'm never going to get any money again, I need to hold on to what I get. Now, whilst the end result of that was that I managed to save money, and it was like good, it all came from a place of fear and lack. So even though I was saving it, it was neurotic. It was like, can't spend on anything. Like I had holes in my shoes, and I was like, no, that money needs to be in my savings. So it was coming from a very like lack mindset. Now, it wasn't until I did my own worked for all this, and then I flipped the other way, and I was able to come from a place of abundance, where I was like, I believe that money will always come to me. If I'm always offering a service, whether that's in a job or whether that's running a business, money is always going to come to me, and money has to flow. So it needs to come in, and then it needs to be intentionally put into savings, put towards debt, spending to bring me joy. You know, all of the things have their own place. And having a scarcity or a lack mindset is really common, especially if you were, you know, I was raised in a working class family in a working class town, and there is that energy of there's not enough to go around. But what I will say is that your brain can change no matter what age you are, or no matter where you're at. Your brain can change. It's just that it sometimes takes time. So if you feel like you operate from a place of fear and lack and scarcity, and you want to have this feeling of like abundance and all of that, there are things that you can do to kind of slip into and reframe and attach yourself into that abundance attitude. So like, just to give you some examples, like some things that I work with my clients on, or I talk to people online about, is first of all is like challenging your brain. So becoming aware of what the problem is and just challenging in that. Is that really true, or is that just my experience? So like for me, when I was like, money's really hard to make, I was like, well, I see other people's parents, and as I got older, friends and business owners, money isn't hard for them to make. So it must just be true for me, but it's not a truth. So I was able to start to challenge it and find examples in my life, both in my life and in other people's life, that went against that belief. So it started to like, it's like you're breaking it down and like deconstructing it so that that argument isn't valid anymore. And the reason why that's so important is because we have something in our brain called the reticular activating system. T, I'm sure you know all about this, psychology girl. But essentially, you know, you're priming your brain to look for examples of what you're telling yourself. So if you are saying things like, money's really hard to come by, I'm really bad with money, I've never been good with money, I'm a spender, and you're attaching that to your identity, all your brain is going to do is just go and look for examples of that. So even if you had a random influx of money, like one day you got a rebate, or, you know, you won on the scratch card, or something little happened, or let's say you did behave well with money, you know, you managed your money okay this month, you paid your debt. If you do one mistake, or if one thing happens, your brain is like primed to look at that and be like, see, I told you we were bad, or I told you there was. And that's the part that you have to try and, I guess, undo and start to give yourself other options. And it comes down to looking at your language and looking for evidence of abundance in your life. And one of the things I always love to talk about is like practicing gratitude. I think that it's such a great way to like prime your brain, especially in the morning, even if literally you feel like all you've got to be grateful for right now is like the fact that the sky is blue, or the fact that you've woken up in a warm house. You know, it doesn't have to be major things, but just kind of like brain hacking. Our brains are so powerful. It's like making use of that, and we can do that in a fun.
I love the thought of being so realistic with things and just like apparent to what's going on. So I think even general like counselling and like psychology, being like present with your mind and understanding what's actually going on is so important. Like I did counselling like a good few years ago now, and it's funny you talk about at the beginning about people just believing that, like, scared that someone's going to die. And like my partner Carl, he works in Manchester 2 days out the week, and if he's not back at like the set time that he's normally back in, I don't have a fear that he's cheating on me or doing anything. I'm just scared he's dead. Like, it's just so weird, and I've got this like anxious mindset, and like we've got each other on Find Your iPhone and whatever, so you do know where they are, and I'll check it if he's not back in time. And it's not, like I said, it's not me thinking that he's with someone else. I just think he's like been run by a train or something. And I think how to get over that, and what they said in counselling, is just be realistic with yourself and actually sit yourself down and be like, is he, the chances of him being dead is very small right now. Like, and I think it takes you a while to understand that, you know.
Yeah, and I think also like the whole being realistic with yourself is such a good point, because when your brain goes into the mode of like, I feel threatened, even if logically you know that it's not a real threat, but I feel threatened, that this is out of my comfort zone, I don't feel safe, whatever that looks like, because it challenges your belief, your brain is going to kind of do everything it can to get you to like listen and be like, no, I'm right. But I think what we all, and this is one thing that I find so fascinating about humans, right? Our brains lie to us constantly. Like, my version of this is, I'm a recovering people pleaser, but I'm a bit of an anxious texter. So if I'm a lot better now, but if I don't have a friend reply, let's just say I've sent them a message and they've read it and you know, they've cracked on, instead of being like, they're busy, I'm like, oh, they hate me now. Like, something
that's the
has
same
happened.
as me. I'm like that.
I'm like, something has happened. They've obviously, even when you know in your heart, like, I've done nothing there is no reason, your brain makes up excuses, it makes up reasons. It's like, it must be this, oh, maybe this whole time they've been lying to you and they don't really like you, you know. And then they drop you a text a couple of hours later and they go, sorry, babes, was just out for the dog, like, you know, thought I'd reply later. And then your brain goes, oh, told you, knew it was fine. Well, hang on a second, how can the brain, the same brain, tell me so confidently that they hate me, but that's so confidently that they knew it wasn't right? Reminding ourselves that just because you have a thought, it doesn't mean you have to pay attention to that thought. It doesn't mean that you have to believe that thought. And part of the process, I guess, of going through like being more self-aware and any kind of journey you go on, it's like challenging those thoughts and choosing which ones are helpful. And sometimes I say to clients, like, when you have thoughts like that, and when we think about money, you know, perhaps maybe they're having a really good month, they're doing really well, and then they have thoughts pop in about like, this is all gonna go tits up, something's gonna happen, you know, money always, the emergencies always pop up, you're gonna have to dip into your savings, and those thoughts come in. You can literally talk to those thoughts as though it's a separate thing. Like, thank you so much, I really appreciate you've been here to protect me for the last 10 years. I've got this one, I'm good, you know, and like letting it be there, but being like, you can join me in the car on the journey, but you are not driving, like that kind of energy, and really just learning to detach from that can be really helpful.
This is a bit of a sidetrack, it's not to do with money, but it's just funny you said about the anxious texting thing, and it just reminded me of a story. So Jack's relatively new to the company, and when he joined, so me and Jack have known each other for a good few years now, and I like kind of sat him down. I was like, listen, like, when you message people from this company, they'll just put like okay, or they put a thumbs up, and like don't worry, they don't hate you, because I got to get used to it. I don't know if it's I
thought they hated me.
I think it might be a generational thing, but if someone puts okay, I was like, oh, so I'm getting sacked then, like that's what's happening.
Okay, so you hate me, like, where's the kiss, where's the emoji, where's the gif?
I'm like XOXO 3 smiley faces and like no one else. Sidetrack, but it's really funny.
That's funny.
I think when you feel like that as well, you can like write, like journaling is quite a good idea. Like, you can actually write down the feelings. If you struggle trying to think about it in your head, like you said, Laura, like actually fighting back with the thoughts that you have it, and if you struggle to do that in your own head, just writing it down can be quite helpful, like the feeling that you had and what was happening at that time, so you can actually see like what is going on paper.
One thing that one tool that I ask like clients to do is keep a money diary, but not in the respect of like just tracking your spending. You know, I bought a coffee, £3. I bought this. As you can tell, I love coffee. It comes up a lot. But it's what emotion were you feeling when you spent? So obviously, you know, there's that layer of remembering to do that. But if you can get into a habit, and even just for a week, set yourself a task of like keeping a track of your emotion and then how you felt when you spent, you can really start to understand and notice patterns of when you might be more likely to spend. You know, common ones, you get stressed, you have a stressful day at work, and it's like, do you know what? I'm going to treat myself, stuff this, and you end up going into a shop, coming out with loads of clothes, or going to the pub and buying loads of pints, like whatever that looks like. But you can start to notice it happens when I get bored, it happens when I get lonely, or it happens when I'm really happy, and you know, I'm learning to, you know, whatever it is. But the key thing is when we spend money, a lot of the time, not all the time, if it's unconscious, if it's not conscious, like if it's not intentional spending, when we're spending and it's from a place of emotion, what we're doing in that moment is we're trying to change our emotional state. We don't want to feel sad anymore. We spend money and we hope that the whatever is on the other side is going to make us feel better. And there's obviously loads of different chemicals and like hormones going on when that happens. Like you that's why online shopping can be so dangerous, because you get such a big dopamine rush because you're at the expectation of it coming in the post. Or you know, if your serotonin levels are low, it's a lot harder to make good financial decisions, so your financial willpower is lower. So you've got all these things in play, and I always say, when you know what your patterns are, so let's just say you go, I always know that I'm more likely to spend when I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling sad. What is your emotional toolkit of things that you can go to when you start to notice that you're feeling that thing, and the go-to isn't spending money? Is it that you're always going to feel better after just calling a friend? Is it that you need to have a bath? Is it that you need to exercise and move your body? Is it that, and the solutions sound so basic, but actually sometimes it's really important to go back to basics, because we live in a world of such consumerism and capitalism where we do feel like the only joy we can get is out of spending money. So it's like reframing your relationship with it is important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we have a lot of people who come to us at IE Hub who are like really anxious and like maybe even depressed. Like I think there's a shocker statistic. I think like 40% of our users have got like mental health conditions that affect, you know, how they use their money. And we've highlighted some issues with like our own personal anxieties, you know, and so many people have it. And with the taboo and everything like that, people are just scared to, even if they have debts, speak to their creditors and like actually say to them, you know, I'm really struggling right now, because they have that shame, because it's an actual person on the other end of the phone, you know, and actually verbalizing that, no matter if they're a stranger, but sometimes that's even worse, of actually saying, you know, that I'm really, really struggling. So I think that's the main reason that IE Hub was set up, so that people can, you know, go online and share their IE Hub budget with literally anyone that they want to. And we love hearing stories from our customers to say, you know, I had all these anxieties and they've not obviously gone, like, because you're still dealing with that debt and that dealing with that money, but they've at least subsided a little bit, and that it just makes it worthwhile, you know, working for a company like that.
Yeah, that's so nice. And I think it's really important. Like I did a bit of research with a company a couple of years ago, which highlighted the impact that mental health had on money and money on mental health. And it was like, you know, and it was what we knew, but it was like, it confirmed, you know, if you have poor mental health or you're struggling, it's going to make managing your money harder. And if you're struggling with your money for whatever reason, it's going to make your mental health worse. So the two, it's like this kind of downward spiral. And I think it's like the shame of, especially if it's debt, or I think a lot of people shame themselves about their own behaviors. Like, why can't I just not spend? Why am I so bad at this? And that adds, like, say, fuel to the fire of the anxiety. But if there is, like, it's great that there's a place that they can come and they can do that. Like when I work with clients and we do one-to-one work, if they have debt, one of the things they always say is, even though the debt isn't cleared, even though I haven't made the dent, just seeing it laid out, knowing the lay of the land, 90% of the time people go, it's not actually as bad as I thought, or it is as bad as I thought, but now I've broken it down as a plan and I know what I have to do to make a difference and progress. That alone feels better. So even though I'm still managing the anxiety or the overwhelm with it, at least I know what I'm doing. And I think that can be really powerful, like the practical side of managing your finances when emotions are involved.
Yeah, definitely. And just as an example from somebody that's been with us, so it's a 22-year-old girl, we'll call her Phoebe. just for the sake of it. And she was so excited when she first turned 18 that she could get all these credit cards and she could start buying whatever she wanted. She had no education of sort of how to use them effectively, so she did get all this debt on her credit card. And when she eventually realized she was struggling and that she would never get out of living with her parents, she was seeing all of her friends like buying their first house and things like that. So again, like you said, she's sort of putting that guilt on herself and comparing herself to other people as well, which is never good. But Moneyway eventually referred her to IE Hub, and they were able to help her out with they were able to refer her to a car repayment company who actually helped set up a payment plan. So even just something as simple as that, like having some sort of plan in place, has helped her reduce her anxiety massively. And she's sort of able to sort of see where she might be able to be in the future now, rather than all this just sort of overwhelming debt that she's got. So it's quite nice to see things like that.
And I think that's really powerful, right? Because when you are feeling in you're in fight or flight, or you're in like crisis mode, it's really hard to be logical. It's hard to do that thing, to face up to it. Like, even though you know it's not helping, burying your head in the sand, avoiding it, run away, it feels like the solution to that problem in the moment, because you couldn't possibly think, well, how can I be logical about this? So if you have a company you can go to, or someone that you do it with, it can be so amazing to kind of, get through those initial stages of like the embarrassment or the shame of what you're going through, which is why it's important to work with judgment-free companies and tools and that kind of thing. But when that plan's there, it's like such a part of the weight gets lifted. And I think that's really that's really nice to hear, that just like that simple thing, like it can be the smallest things that make the difference sometimes, I think.
We're seeing a lot of younger people like coming to us, and like I think you think of debt and you think of like older people who maybe falling behind on their mortgage and things like that. But I mean, we did it. That's another reason why we started this podcast, is because me and Jack were like 24, 25, and we've had issues with like being in uni, taking out an overdraft, and it just spiral and things like that. And it's so common, and it's even more taboo, I think, in younger people, because like the opinion is, oh, well, you're that young, why you're in this much debt? You're like, you've only just turned 18. But it's so common now.
And like when people have that conversation and they acknowledge and they go, I actually don't even know where that money's gone, and they might be able to roughly say, oh well, I did one big holiday, or I did this, but money, like, you're not constantly doing mental maths in your head, right? And even I do it. As somebody who is a money coach, I teach other people about their money. I still mess up myself sometimes, and there have been times where if I don't set myself a budget for the month, because I've been too busy, it'll be all right this month, I get to the end of the month and I go, where on earth has my money gone? And I sit down and I look at it, I see the transactions, I know they're mine, I remember making them, but because it's all £10 here, £5 here, this, that, well, when it adds up, that's hundreds. And that's what makes an impact. And I think that what we can't do is shame ourselves for the fact that we didn't get a financial education in school, from our parents, from the government. But what we can do is, and I think that's why it's really important to get into like young people as early as possible, we can take accountability and go, do you know what? I'm gonna teach myself. And there's so many tools and podcasts and influencers and loads of like things that you can go out, like we have the power of the internet. I guess it's more than, funnily enough, goes the other way, and it's discerning between like who can we trust and who is a trusted voice. But there's so much information out there, and then but again it kind of goes the other way sometimes, because there's so much information, it can get really overwhelming. And I always say, like, if you're starting out, or if you're in a position where you're feeling a bit like uneasy about it, tackle things one thing at a time. Don't try to do everything. And I think it's really, you see it happen when like New Year rolls over. And I've done this year on year. I think this is the first year I haven't done this, but year on year, it's always a goal for me to get healthy and fit and get back to the gym and drink more water and start eating better. And I go from like Christmas, where I'm just basically one ball of cheese, to wanting to do all these healthy things, and you essentially set yourself up for a loss because you're trying to do too much, as opposed to being like, this week I'll just move I'll do 10k steps. Next week I'm doing, and it's the same with your money. If you haven't even got the basics of budgeting and maybe you've got some debt to clear, the last thing you want to be thinking is like how to optimize your pension and start investing in the stock market. So like just trust that there are like, it's okay for there to be steps, and that your finances aren't just going to increase on a linear trajectory. It's going to, one year might be way better, the next year might be a bit shitter, and it's going to go like that, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot of people trying to pay off debt and think, like, it's new year, I'm going to be debt free by the end of 2024. And then they might have so many debts and they'll be like, right, I just want to get this debt gone, and they'll pay this £200 off. But then they haven't met the minimum payments on the bigger debts that they've got. And then bailiffs knocking on the door. And it's like, just understand that sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but like it's sometimes financially better for you to do that,
Yeah. It's more sustainable both financially and emotionally.
Yeah.
We got a few questions in as well from some of the listeners. So they emailed a few questions to us. One of them you pretty much just answered about. So one person asked, are there any suggestions for somebody who wants to learn more about finances, to like the first steps to educating themselves, really? I feel like you covered quite a lot of that, but is there anything you would sort of add to it? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is first of all, understand how you like to learn. So, there's so many different ways that you can learn. You've got like YouTube, and it's like video. You've got podcasts, which is audio. You've got blogs and articles, and really understand like, how do you best take in information? Because sometimes we can, for example, I love reading. I'm a massive reader. I read very quickly. I take the information in very well. My housemates hate it. It takes them ages to get through a book. They would rather listen to an audiobook. If I listen to an audiobook, it's game over, because I'm thinking about a million other things. Before I know it, I'm 5 chapters in and I've got no clue what's going on. So really understand like how you like to learn, and if it's books, whatever. And then just go look for some options that relate to financial education. And I do think unless you get into like the depths of the internet and really like specific financial topics, on a whole, a lot of the financial education that is like for just getting started is quite good out there. And the focus should be on, in my opinion, the starting points are like your relationship with money and learning how to manage your money. They're like the two key things. So kind of like emotional side, and then like the basics of the practical, so money management, budgeting, and using debt responsibly.
Another question that we have is someone who they just turned 18, just starting a new job, don't know whether to take the company pension or invest it. So I feel like you better be a little bit more than me and Jack on this topic.
So what I would say is, the good thing about a workplace pension is that when you put a percentage of your income into a pension, your employer is going to add some into it as well. Now, a lot of the times they match it. So whatever you put in, your money is getting doubled because the employer will put in. Some employers match it right up to any percent, and some have a cap. So it's really important to like find out what that cap is. That money gets added into your pension, and you also get tax relief, which is kind of like, it's the way that I heard it explained once, which I love, is like a meal deal. So you've bought the sandwich, which is what you put in. The drink that you get for free is what your employers put in, and the snack is what HMRC and the government is putting in. So it's kind of like this meal deal. It's really good. When I heard that, I was like, I love that. And it's so relatable. We all have a meal deal. So that money is then being invested on the stock market. Now, the downfalls about having a pension is that you have to be a certain age to access it. So if you're looking to invest in the stock market and grow your money for the future, this can be a really good idea if you know that you're going to want access to that money earlier. For example, you don't want to wait till retirement age and you've got a plan to retire when you're 40 or 50. And you have to have your emotions and your relationship with money in the right place, right? Because if you don't have a very good relationship with money and that's something you're working on, you can't touch your pension. So you never have to worry that you're going to dip into it just for a holiday. With like a stocks and shares ISA, which is easy access, you can trade on and off the stock market, you can just dip into it and take what you want. Whilst you shouldn't if you want that long-term growth. So what I would say is, if you're 18, you're not going to get auto-enrolled into the pension because you have to be 21 for that. But I personally, I mean, I can't give advice, but I think that the pension scheme is really, really great for maximizing your money. And I kind of wish that when I was in employment, I did pay into my pension, but I kind of wish I rinsed it, but I didn't. And if you are 18 and you're, your early 20s, you've got so much time that whatever decision you make now, if you learn more over the next few years and then you change your mind and you do one or the other option in a couple of years, you're still good. Like, it's not like you're in your 50s and you're like, I want to retire next year. So that's what I would say.
Do you think that's the same principle for people who want to save, but then they're worried about dipping into it? Because I think someone sent in a comment about I'm stuck in a cycle of save and I need to dip into it. How do I get out of this? And do you think it's putting it in something that's a bit more locked and secure?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two ways that you can think about dipping into savings. One is understanding why. What is it you're dipping in for? Is it because you're saving too much and you're being unrealistic and you're literally not giving yourself enough to live? Because we've all been there. We're like, oh my God, this month I'm going to save like 70% of my paycheck. And then you get a peek in and you're like, what am I doing? So are you being unrealistic? Because the worst thing about that is it is worse for you on a brain level to put a large sum in and then take a bit out, because you're you're telling your brain those savings aren't for what they're for, and you're better off reducing your saving rate and not touching it. And because then you feel more successful, even if the end result was you saved the same amount. So it's really important to do it at base level. You could put friction between you and your savings. So put it in a locked away account. There's so many different options out there for like fixed term and different locked accounts. You obviously would need to know that you don't want to touch that money for a long, for an X period of time. But I think as well, what is the emotion and the motivation behind saving? We all know that we're going to be more motivated, or most of us would be more motivated to save for a holiday than we would to save for an emergency fund, because emergency funds are boring and no one cares about them. But we do care because it gives us this sense of stress-free, gives us a peace of mind. And if one of your values is financial security, you actually might be more motivated to save for an emergency fund. So really just understand what the motivation is behind saving, and your relationship with money will help.
Yeah, definitely. And another one we got as well with saving, or investing really. So someone said they've got some credit card debt, and other types of debt, but they do want to start investing as well and get into investment. So would you recommend that they tackle their debt first, or can you do both at the same time? Like, what would your advice be? Obviously, you can't give advice, but
guidance. Yeah. What my thoughts be.
Yeah.
So I actually have a whole episode on this on my podcast, which is should I clear debt or should I invest? If anybody wants to come and listen. But what I usually say is it depends if it's high interest. So if you're getting charged a really high percentage to have that debt, you need to look at what that percentage is versus roughly what percentage you think you're going to make investing. If the percentage that you're wasting or losing to interest on your debt is higher than what you're making over by investing, then it makes more financial sense to clear your high interest debt first. If all of that debt is like 0%, it's, maybe a fixed loan, whatever that looks like, and it's going to make no difference whether you clear it sooner or later, then you could look to do the two at the same time. But really, we want to maximize the interest side of it, and it only makes financial sense to do it if investing sooner is going to outweigh and make more money than clearing your debt. So that's what I would say. Obviously, there is an emotional part in that as to like how you feel about clearing debt and investing and how long it's going to take. So it's so personal. But yeah, the key thing I would say to look at is how much you're being charged to have that debt. That's going to be the biggest decider.
Yeah, I feel like I would be overwhelmed trying to do both at the same time. I feel like I would want to focus on one at a time.
Yeah.
And I think the key thing is, in most instances, it makes sense for people to clear debt first, because usually the people who are struggling with more debt, they've had it for a longer period of time. Maybe it's a higher balance. Therefore, it's very likely that there is going to be interest on there. And if you can just channel all of your efforts into getting that debt gone, getting yourself at zero, doing all of those things, it's like it leans back into delayed gratification and being like, I've worked really hard doing this, and now I get to do the fun thing of investing and growing my money and knowing that I'm not wasting anything.
Yeah, it's worth it in the long term, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much, Laura. Can you share your social media and let us know where to find you? Obviously, we'll link it below, but just for the listeners.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm on all of the social platforms. So Instagram is probably my main, Instagram and TikTok. So on Instagram, I'm at Laura __ and _more. I think that's mine. And then TikTok is at Laura and More. And I have YouTube and LinkedIn. And I also have a podcast called Mind Money Soul.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Is there
Thank
any
you.
final words to sum up the whole experience, and any final advice to listeners of the Pocket Perspective podcast?
I guess the number one thing that I would say that I tell people is, if you listen to this and you're like, oh my God, I've got so many thoughts, so many feelings that I want to do, definitely just take this as a moment to get honest with yourself, get aware of whatever's going on, and give yourself some grace. Like, if you weren't taught it, don't beat yourself up about any situation you are in. Just choose to, from this moment, be more intentional. And no matter what journey you're on, the feeling of confidence and empowerment that's going to come from taking control of your finances is greater than any other feeling. So yeah, I'm excited for you to all go on your journey.
Thank you so much. I think it was an amazing episode. No hate to any of our past guests, but this is my absolute favourite episode. I've learned a lot personally, so yeah, absolutely loved it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Having me.
Lovely. And yeah, thank you very much to all of the listeners, and we will all speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.